appropriation did not go through the competitive grant process like all other projects in Prop 4 are required to. So we'll see if this remains in the final draft or not, given the opposition to how the money was appropriated. Um, and then due to changes in auction forecasts, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is the money that comes from the state's Cap and Invest program, was reduced by $37 million since January. And in January, we already saw GGRF at a lower than expected level. I will go into more detail on this in a second. And then just generally, there was limited additional funding for climate programs. So not a lot of change for climate funding since January in the May revise. I will go into a little bit more detail now on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. If we go to the next slide, since it is one of the main sources of climate funding in the budget. Apologies if this is repetitive to anyone who has already seen or gone over the structure, but it is some important background. I think makes more sense when we talk about the cuts that are happening to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So I'll just do a quick review of the appropriation structure that was passed in SB 840 last year as part of Cap and Invest reauthorization before we discuss the changes in the May revise. In the first tier, this is $370 million that goes to a couple of obligations like SRA fee backfill, some general fund backfill, and some money to the Legislative Council Climate Bureau. The second tier, the legislature chose to give $1 billion to high-speed rail, and then they created a new $1 billion appropriation annually to the legislative fund. This was an exciting change that we saw last year as we were thinking that Cap and Invest revenue might grow, meaning that this fund for the legislature would increase and lead to more opportunities for funding Sierra Nevada priorities. And then in the third tier, we see the set allocations to all existing programs, which was everything that was previously receiving a continuous appropriation before Cap and Invest was reauthorized and the structure was changed. This structure was set with an expectation of about $4 billion of revenue from Cap and Invest. And then if revenues come in lower than expected, the cuts will go proportionally to programs in the third category, then tier 2, and then tier 1 if revenues are so low. Next slide, please. So looking in detail at tier 2 and what we're seeing in the May revise, $1 billion remains for high-speed rail. And then in 2025, the legislature had proposed priorities for their discretionary funds this year, including healthy forests, nature-based solutions, low carbon transportation alternatives, sustainable agricultural practices, and other programs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. However, following an agreement made to balance last year's budget, the governor's proposal in January and also in May would direct a significant amount of the Cap and Invest revenue from this legislative discretionary fund to CAL FIRE operations. So this would use up about $750 million of that $1 billion that was set aside for discretionary climate investments, depleting most of that fund. And we didn't see any change in this in the May revise, despite the $16.5 billion of additional revenue in the general fund, which does make more sense for a source of CAL FIRE funding since CAL FIRE is an essential service and GGRF is not a permanent funding source. And then given an already committed $250 million from SB 840, there is no remaining money in the legislative discretionary fund for the 2026-27 budget. We'll see if anything with the CAL FIRE backfill changes between now and the final budget draft, but that is up in the air as of now. Next slide, please. And then looking at the final tier, which is funding for all programs that already existed last year that were getting money from the continuous appropriations. This funding was reduced due to predicted GGRF auction revenues in January and then was further reduced in May. This table shows the appropriations set for the program last year based on how much money the programs were getting in previous years. Then it shows the reduced appropriations in January and the May revised appropriation. Just highlighting an example, the $200 million for healthy and resilient forests, which is a really important program for the region, has been traditionally received $200 million each year, and that has been reduced to $105 million, which it's half of its original allocation. Concerning given that GGRF is a main source of continuous appropriation for wildfire resilience funding. The legislature had previously expressed that they would use their discretionary funds to restore program funds to the promised level in Tier 3 if auction revenues were coming in lower than expected, but they cannot do this year since their fund has been depleted. So as of now, the program funds will remain in the appropriated amount in the May revised column in this table. And then next slide, please. I'll just talk about wildfire resilience funding in a little bit more detail since this is a really crucial area of funding for the region. After the May revision and the reduction in GGRF, this year's budget would now be the state's smallest investment in wildfire resilience since 2019, which is a concerning trend for the state. That's not the way we want to see funding going, especially as the wildfire crisis is worsening and we're seeing record low snowpack levels this winter in the Sierra. So SBC's policy priorities in this area remain the same from January, given there's been no increase in wildfire resilience funding this spring, hoping to increase the Prop 4 appropriation for wildfire and forest resilience to $500 million. Currently, it is at $314 million, which is a good start, but almost half of the allocation from last year. And given the pressure on other funding sources and the importance that we see of getting funding on the ground as soon as possible, we'd like to see that appropriation get closer to $500 million. And then also hoping to protect the $200 million that has traditionally been allocated to wildfire resilience from GGRF, which could be done through reducing the CAL FIRE backfill to support climate resilience investments. So these will both be priorities for us moving forward as we continue advocacy before the governor releases his final budget. And then next slide, please just highlight the graph of state wildfire investment since 2018. As you can see here, the investments are not trending in a direction that we'd like to see, and the just a visualization of how much lower the proposed 2026-27 investments are compared to previous years. So hoping to see some increase in wildfire resilience before the final budget draft. And then just wanted to highlight one more program in GGRF that's critical to the region, which we talked about last time. If anyone is here for the January budget webinar, if we can go to the next slide, just highlight SALC, which is an additional concern for SBC that we are keeping an eye on. SALC is the Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program. It's used by many of our land trusts and other partners, and it can be used for land use planning grants, agricultural conservation acquisition grants, and capacity and project development grants. And it's been shown to be one of the most cost-effective ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in all of the programs that are within GGRF. In the January budget, the governor proposed a split in the affordable housing and sustainable communities housed within GGRF. And that is where SALC is housed. And with this split, SALC would go under the sustainable communities portion of the program, which would receive a smaller amount of appropriation than affordable housing would. This split did not change in the May revise, and there's not a lot of information on what the plan is here. SBC did some legislative meetings in the spring, and no one was sure what was happening, but previously, SALC was 9% of the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, which put it at about $70 million of funding, but it would get reduced to $20 million if it was 9% of just the Sustainable Communities amount. I do want to highlight that there could be no reduction. We're just not sure. So this is just an uncertainty that we are keeping our eye out, and there's just no clarity in the budget on what will happen with SALC. So that's something that we will continue to monitor as we're watching the final budget draft. Next slide, please. And then while I talk about GGRF, I think it is important to discuss the proposed cap and invest regulations that came out recently. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of that, but I'll just do a quick overview of what is happening there. CARB did release new draft amendments to cap and invest regulations this April. Their new regulations would substantially alter the program and have a significant impact on GGRF. They are pretty complex, but essentially, bottom line, they would provide a manufacturing decarbonization incentive paid for by 118 million free allowances, and also give an additional $800 million in assistance for industries in what they've said is hopes to improve affordability, reduce gas prices, and encourage industries to stay in the state. And this would stay in place until 2030. Essentially, they would be giving industries free allowances and allowing for the potential of industries to get permits to pollute. This has raised a lot of concerns since they've released these guidelines, given that it would allow additional emissions above the cap level and increase uncertainty about whether the state is going to be able to meet its 2030 greenhouse gas reduction targets. And this new proposal, given that there would be additional free allowances, would have the amount of money in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which would leave Tier 3 unfunded and only partially fund Tier 2. So there would be no funding for those existing programs in Tier 3. Nothing is certain yet. CARB is holding their hearing tomorrow, so we'll have more information later this week on the outcome of that. But the proposal has garnered a lot of strong opposition from climate groups and groups reliant on this GGRF funding for transit, affordable housing, clean air, all of those programs. It's also has opposition from industries who don't think that it's going to do enough for them to be able to lower gas prices. So overall, not very popular, but yeah, we'll have to see what happens with that this week. But just want to highlight that in the context of talking about GGRF and the implications of the May revise, is that this could all change if CARB's regulations end up getting passed. So can provide update on that moving forward. That is my main highlight of the climate funding in the budget. So I think we can move on to talk about a couple of other topics before wrapping up, but I will move on to housing now. In terms of housing, like we saw in January, the governor did not include any new state funds for housing, affordable housing development programs, or homelessness in the May revision, just making it even more important to put the $10 billion affordable housing bond on the 2026 ballot to be approved by voters in November. A lot of California housing programs and projects are running out or have already run out of funding. So this is really essential to do this year. There are two housing bond bills. Both have now moved to their second house, so it seems likely that they are going to make it to the governor's desk without a problem. And the governor did indicate in his budget that he is looking forward to working with the legislature in the coming weeks to prioritize the state's investments in addressing the housing and homelessness crisis. So it seems like there will be some negotiations there around housing funding. And SBC is continuing to follow both of the housing bond bills, which will likely be combined into one bill at some point. If anyone's interested in supporting the housing bond, I'm happy to send a sign-on link afterwards. Just let me know. But getting the housing bond on the November ballot will be the main chance for the state to get that essential funding for housing. And then Also looking at energy and the outlook for energy in the budget. Didn't see a lot of new information on this in the May revise. If we can move to the next slide. But energy and utility bills do continue to be a focus of the legislature this session, especially with a focus on affordability. We have not seen a lot of additional information on energy in the budget, but it is something we've seen a lot of legislation for this session. I will highlight that the legislature has been engaged in the connection between utilities and wildfire mitigation and reform this year. Last year, the legislature passed SB 254, which required the California Earthquake Authority to do a study on these topics regarding long-term reforms on insurance, wildfire mitigation, and how they can hold electrical corporations accountable for safety. And the report is out now, which gives some potential actions. So we are thinking that this could lead the legislature to take action soon now that their report is out, and that they had the report done on such a quick timeline. Also happy to send out that. It's a pretty long report, but if anyone is interested in reading it, that report is out from SB 254. And then also on the energy front, energy efficiency programs continue to be a focus for SBC, and ensuring their value is recognized and their funding is maintained. We did oppose numerous bills this session that were threatening public purpose programs, which include energy efficiency programs. There were multiple bills trying to cut funding or change the source of funding for these programs. And a win for us was that none of these bills made it out of the first house. But we'll continue to focus on advocacy and education here, since there were some votes for these bills across both parties, and there was one that made it all the way to appropriation. So we see a need for continued education on the importance of funding for public purpose programs and energy efficiency programs as well. So that will be a focus for SBC as the legislative session continues this year. And I'll just wrap up with some key takeaways, and then happy to open it up for any questions. But looking at the May revise, the state's fiscal position has improved since January, but despite additional revenues, no additional funding has gone to climate priorities or wildfire resilience. And we're seeing a lot of budget challenges and structural deficits remain. So there could be a lot that changes between now and July. The governor has until July 1st to sign the final budget draft, and there will be negotiations between the legislature and the governor between now and then. SBC will be continuing advocacy for Sierra Nevada priorities between now and then. There's still time for changes in the budget, but yeah, we'll have to wait and see for the final draft in the end of June. So thanks everyone for coming. I'm happy to open it up now for discussion or any questions. And yeah, if there's anything I can't answer, happy to follow up with information later this week. And I did see some questions in the chat. Emily, thank you for answering those. But if there's anything that was unanswered, can also follow up on that.
Hi, I have one question. I just can't find my little hand raised thing, so I'm just gonna jump in.
Perfect.
Yeah, I was wondering, whether Newsom's interest in a presidential campaign is impacting his May revised proposal, if you know anything about that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and something we were, I think, thinking about in January when his budget deficit projections were a lot different in the LAO. I think as he leaves office, wanting to leave California in a really good fiscal position is something that's going to look good for him in his presidential campaign. So I think that's kind of top of mind for him. And I think one of the reasons why he was trying to reduce the deficit and make sure the state was in a solid fiscal position as he leaves office. And then I think also we're kind of seeing a switch in some of his priorities from in some years him being really focused on climate to kind of moving forward with some priorities on affordability, and potentially kind of seeing some change in interest there in the budget. Emily, don't know if I missed anything there, but I think yeah, definitely top of mind for him as he looks towards a presidential campaign.
Awesome. Thank you.
And also, I was looking in the chat. We had Deirdre ask, like, what can we do to help support the Sierra priorities?
We do have a budget letter from our Wildfire Solutions Coalition. If I don't know if the sign on is still open for that, but we can, if it is, we can potentially distribute that for organizations to sign on, mostly focused on increasing funding for wildfire resilience. I think that's the main action item that we have for supporting Sierra priorities. And then, yeah, if your organization is participating in any kind of advocacy, just encouraging, investments in Sierra priorities and programs that benefit the Sierra.
Yeah, thanks, Annika. The one additional thing I can add is that Sierra Business Council is a founding member of the Wildfire Solutions Coalition, which I put a link to in the chat. And I put a link to the budget letter. There's going to be a sign-on link going up later today, so you'll be able to sign on to that. And then we have a video campaign. The coalition has a video campaign launching tomorrow about trying to communicate the importance of wildfire resilience as a issue for California's next governor as we head into election season. So follow the coalition on social media, and anything you can do to help boost the profile of that video and the associated social media. We'd appreciate it to really help get the attention of our leaders in Sacramento and our future state governor about the importance of this issue, both to our region and to the whole state.
Awesome. Thank you, Annika and Emily. Do we have any other outstanding questions?
Yeah, I think one other question I had was if there are any updates on AB 35 and the Prop 4 APA exemption.
Yeah, that's a great question. That was a top line issue for us this year. Yeah, so just background for anyone, AB 35, there were some issues with getting Prop 4 money out the door because it did not include an exemption for the Administrative Procedures Act. And this was causing a lot of trouble for agencies trying to get money out the door for grants and everything. AB 35 is a bill that would provide an exemption for the Administrative Procedures Act for Prop 4. We did get an exemption just for the money that was allocated this year for Prop 4. There was an AP exemption in an early action budget bill. So for this year, we are getting money out the door again for Prop 4. And then AB 35 is moving again. It's in its second house. So I think at some point it was unclear if it might be stalled or not, but it does look like it's moving again. I think there were some concerns that maybe it was too sweeping of an exemption. So it's possible that there might be some amendments to the bill, but as of now, it does look like the legislature is still focused on getting that APA exemption, and that AB 35 will hopefully be passed in some form this year. Thanks for the question. Yeah, happy to take any more if anyone else has any other questions.
Awesome. We'll make sure to send out the slides and the recording afterwards. And if you can't think of a question right now, but you have one, please just follow up with us. With that being said, I'll stop the recording.